Good day. Today is Sunday, February 2nd, 2025, and this is episode 295, getting perilously close to episode 300 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good evening, Mr. Bell. I do believe January lasted approximately 18 weeks.
It certainly felt like it. And today, by the way, is Groundhog Day, and Puxatawny Phil did see his shadow, which means I think 6 more weeks of tariffs. I mean winter.
I do all of my almost all of my forecasting, whether it's in business, finance, weather, based on rodent sightings. I have a pair of chipmunks that I use for all of my stock trading in the backyard.
How's that working out?
They're down 94% at the moment, but I am hopeful for the future.
Well, you need to do some kind of anti-trade,
I could
trade the opposite, and you'd be up.
That would have been good info a year ago. Where were you?
Right here. Right here.
Anyway.
So a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. And another reminder that we certainly do appreciate everybody who is donating to our Patreon page, which is, by the way, patreon.com/defensivesec, SEC. And if you're so apt to do so, we would love to count you as one of our supporters. So thank you.
Absolutely. You guys are awesome. We appreciate it.
Right. We have a good slate of interesting stuff to talk about today. And the first one comes from InfoSecurity Magazine. And the title here is 58% of ransomware victims forced to shut down operations. Woo! And despite what the headline might lead you to believe, they're not talking about like going out of business, shut down operations. They mean that they're temporarily halted production type of shutdown. So
in some sense,
in some way,
yeah.
Correct. So this is a article about a report from the Ponemon Institute. It's called the Global Cost of Ransomware Study, and it does a fair amount of contrasting between results from the same report in 2021 with new updated results from 2024. There were some interesting statistics that I pulled out of both the article and the report itself. I'll just kind of step through some of the highlights. Let's see. That, as the headline would lead you to believe, there was an increase in the number of victims that had to shut down their operations. It was 45%, went up to 58% last year. There was an increased number of victims that indicated they had suffered significant revenue loss, and it was up from 22 to 40%. We did get better. They did see a reduction in the time it took to recover from an attack from 190 hours to 132 hours. They said that the average amount demanded in a ransomware attack is $1.2 million. They cited that 51% of the responses indicated that their organization would never pay a ransom. But then they also say that 51% of victims did pay the ransom. And you might say, well, how could that be? In the reality,
the math ain't mathin'. Yeah.
Well, the reason is that they surveyed people who were not, like the survey included people who were not also victims. So, if there were, let's say there were 1,000 people, I think there was over 2,500 respondents, but let's say 1,000 people, 500 of them had suffered a ransomware attack, and 500 didn't. And of the total population, 51% is saying they would never pay a ransom. And of the subset that did experience the attack, 51% did pay the ransom. And they had some reasons why. They cite some reasons why that the victims paid the ransom. They didn't want their data leaked. They couldn't afford the downtime. They had cyber insurance, which I think is a terrible reason to pay a ransom. But there it is.
But is it? I mean, we can think about that for a second. Like, I think a lot of executives think about this exactly for that reason. Like, it's why I have insurance. Well, it's my easy button to get back up and running.
It is, but then you go into the next section of the report.
Yes.
And this is where it gets really interesting. They said only 13% of victims who paid the ransom received all their data back.
Yeah, that was very surprising to me.
40%.
So only 13%. But let's center on that for just a second. Like, the entire ransomware ecosystem model is based on people believing they're going to get their stuff back, or stop the exfiltration, or stop the extortion, or whatever it is, if they pay. And if we're down to 13%, that basically starts to, if that becomes widespread knowledge and people believe that and it's true, that starts to destroy the entire market pressure for ever paying.
Absolutely.
It destroys the entire ransomware model.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like criminals, like, we have fought so much against ransomware for the past, 5, 6, 7 years?
Long time.
And it may collapse under its own greed before anything else happens.
It's interesting because this is not, I don't know that this is necessarily a new finding. Like, I think most organizations have this intuition, and I suspect that they're paying on the chance that they get lucky and are one of the 13%, I suppose.
Are you saying you can't trust criminals?
No, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. But
there's no honor amongst thieves?
There's no honor amongst thieves, which, by the way, dovetails into some of the other stats they had, which is that even after paying, 40% said that their data was still leaked, which again, highlights a big problem. Like, if you are a victim and you still have a 40% chance of your data being leaked, and that's the primary motivation for you paying the ransom, that's not great odds. And then 32% indicated that the attackers demanded more money after they paid the initial ransom.
Jeez.
So that's amazing.
Yeah. I've always been somewhat pragmatic about this. I've always said a business has to make its own decision based on the circumstances they're in at the time. Like, if you're now I keep using filler words. Sorry, I got to get better about that. If you're a hospital and it's disrupting critical care, you may choose to pay that ransom. And I'm not necessarily mad about that. But if there's very little chance of that payment actually resulting in the outcome you want, this changes the entire equation. And now it's just not an option. It's not going to yield what you want, and you're wasting time and energy on that, and don't count on it as a solve. Have a different solution beforehand. Right. Yeah.
Right. And that, by the way, is there's an equal set of reasons for the 49% that didn't pay, the victims that didn't pay the ransom, and things like they had backups and their data wasn't that important and whatnot. But I think that going forward, organizations that are victimized, if they are going to pay, really need to be doing a little more homework on who their hacker is, because I suspect that if you were to really look at the landscape, you would very likely find that there are some actors who reliably will deliver on the ability to recover your data or not. release your data or not demand more money. And I suspect that there are others who are very unreliable in those dimensions. And so I'm not sure that this is like one homogeneous whole.
What's the best way to look that up? Do they like have Yelp scores or like Better Business Bureau scores of like?
I suspect that a lot of the incident response organizations like your CrowdStrikes and your Mandiants and whatnot, I suspect have
I
the
you know
ability to
what?
guide on that.
I think our next business model is to start a ransomware threat actor rating system for,
Like Yelp.
1 out of 5 stars.
I think the Yelp is the Yelp model is a very good idea.
Yeah. How good was their customer support? Were they responsive? Was the
Mhm.
data in good shape when it was returned to you? Was it fed and watered properly? You can have like a 6 or 7 tiered ranking system that I think this could be helpful. I think the VCs would line up for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm gonna write out the business plan. Keep going.
It's a fabulous idea. So this report also indicates a couple of important indications on how the attacks started. Again, for the victims, the actual victims, they indicated that 45% of ransomware attacks, unsurprisingly, started with phishing. 32%. This one was surprising. 32% started with RDP compromises. I
So
just didn't realize it was that common.
yeah,
And then
both of those feel to me like password related problems, so that both could be
yes,
solved with phishing resistant MFA.
right,
Interesting. Sorry, go on.
quite likely so. And then 19% are exploiting software vulnerabilities. So I suspect your intuition that it may not be that all of those are identity related compromises. Maybe there's some configuration related, or some of the phishing is malware, installing a Trojan or something like that. But I suspect that your intuition is correct, that if you were to have the right kind of identity in place, identity management in place, that very likely would have mitigated a lot of it. And then they go on to say,
Yeah.
by the way, once they get in, they say 52% of the actors are using missing patches in the internal environment to move around laterally. 47% are using weak passwords. 35% are using local administrator weaknesses. I don't exactly know what that means. But again, lots of opportunity to improve. And I think this is, again, intuitive to me, at least. A lot of organizations view vulnerabilities that are only exist internally as much less significant. And
Yep.
actors are taking advantage of that fact. Once they get in, they're able to move around laterally. There was one other takeaway I had from this, because they
What's that?
talk about some of the hazards or the things that happen in as part of these ransomware attacks, and encrypting data is only one of them. It's also very obviously it's stealing copies and disclosing copies of your data. It's denial of service attacks, and a range of other things, like contacting your customers or the actual end victims and so on. The thing that struck me was, we continue to talk about ransomware as if it's some kind of software that gets installed on a system. And I think that this is a much broader category of attack now than just like a piece of software that in every case gets installed on a system that like, this is bigger than what we had seen in the past with regards to, because it's what I'm trying to say is that not every one of these attacks actually involves actual malware. Sometimes they're using, as we've talked about in the past, like they're using the native functions in Amazon S3 buckets to encrypt data. They're just stealing the data. They're just downloading the data and deleting it without actually using any custom tools. They're like FTPing the data off the server. So anyway, it's a pedantic thing, but I think that we perhaps need to eventually find a new term, because I think ransomware, at least in my mind, is kind of a narrow, it has some narrow applicability implied in it.
Yeah, it's becoming more like digital extortion or cyber extortion might be
Exactly. Right.
a more accurate term.
Right.
Speaking of, I think you said the average demand from the bad actor was 1.2 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because that's also your speaker appearance fee. That's very coincidental.
Totally coincidental. Not in any way related. I promise.
Mm-hmm.
Promise.
Mm-hmm.
Promise. The other thing, by the way, I want to say that this was a report put out by Ponemon, who is also the same organization that creates that cost of a data breach, which, by the way, in 2024 was $4.8 million, or almost $4.9 million. And in this report, they talk about how the average cost to respond to a data breach dropped from $168,000 in 2021 to $146,000 in 2024. And I got to thinking, like, there's this thing that I'm now going to call the Ponemon tension, which is kind of like the Hubble tension. For those of you who are super nerds like me, the Hubble tension is the difference between the age of the universe as calculated by the cosmic microwave background radiation, and the latter's measure. I think there's this thing that emerges between how you measure the cost of a data breach by the labor versus by, I don't know, some survey, tell me how much your data breach costs.
Right. I think it depends on who's paying for the survey.
I think so.
And for the record, we have often laughed uproariously at Ponemon's stats.
Yes. So I am now declaring the Ponemon tension. Now, I think that some of it is explained by, like, the $4.8 million includes other stuff like fines and whatnot. But
and one thing we kind of skipped over in the article is that, quote, reputation and brand damage is now considered to be the biggest financial cost for ransomware attack, replacing costs associated with legal and regulatory action, not direct staff time to repair. But nonetheless, Ponemon's lawyers can send their cease and desist to jerry@defensivesecurity.org.
Fair enough. All right. I expect to see a Wikipedia article about the Ponemon tension soon. Okay. Anyway, by the way, it's an article or a report worth reading. Just, obviously make sure you have the right context in your mind, that these reports are funded by organizations who have their own marketing agenda. Right?
You might see that theme come up in another story today.
Oh yes. As a matter of fact, I think it's actually next, which is a good segue into a article by Cybersecurity Dive, and the title here is "Security Tool Consolidation Boosts Efficiency and Threat Mitigation." This is a study created by Palo Alto and IBM. Full disclosure, IBM was my former employer. So they threw me out the airlock. Not that I'm bitter or anything.
I mean, you guys did share custody of your son, so
that's very true. It's very true.
You try to remain amicable. For the weekend handoffs. Anyway, sorry. That was not a very well thought out joke. Carry on. So IBM and Palo Alto made this study that, let me guess, reinforces why you should buy IBM and Palo Alto stuff.
And not only that, but only that. Right? So the whole the whole idea behind this report is that organizations, and just some of the key bullet points that are that, as an example, organizations use an average of 83 different security tools from 29 different vendors. And the headline of the report is that, this creates significant inefficiencies. And one of the proof points that they highlight is that for for the organizations that they surveyed, they've got this term called platformization, which is, I think, basically it's consolidation of their security estate or security tool estate. They're saying that for those organizations who have embraced this platformization, it's reduced the amount of time to detect an incident by 74 days on average, and the time to mitigate a security incident by 84 days. So,
Um,
yeah.
I am skeptical. Carry on.
So, I mean, look, I'll just give you my kind of unvarnished thoughts on this. It's a pretty long report. I've actually downloaded the report, and I'm going to suffer the wrath of IBM and Palo Alto spam just for all of you, because I love you all. The report is, I think it's about 32 pages long. Again, the subtext really is around standardizing on a particular platform, and I think this was definitely something that Palo Alto paid IBM to perform. Now, by the way, Palo Alto and IBM have a very tight and very large and strategic security alliance now. So it's I don't think that's necessarily coincidental, but I think Palo Alto certainly has a horse in the race of trying to convince customers or prospective customers that you really shouldn't necessarily be shopping around for best of breed in every category. What you really need to be doing is focusing on consolidation and simplification and optimization, and that is where the real benefit to your security operations lie. Now, my take on this, having been a CISO for some period of time, not that I was necessarily a great CISO, but I think that most companies, most IT organizations, kind of all up and down the ladder, I think have an intuition that this, what they call tool sprawl, is not a great thing, and that creates inefficiencies and whatnot. I don't think that's a novel concept, but at the same time, I think that believing or asserting that there's not a meaningful difference between what we would consider to be a best of breed security tool and what you would typically see as something that's rolled up into a full featured security vendor. I think there's a significant difference in there.
No, Jerry, it checked the box on the RFI. It's the same.
And I also think, furthermore, that it is, now again, I'm not that familiar with Palo Alto's stuff, but I am familiar with a lot of organizations who have a kind of a similar go-to-market strategy, and the assertion that all of their tools kind of work together seamlessly is a joke, because most of the time they're like a big roll up of all kinds of little components that they've purchased from other companies and done a half-ass job of integrating. And then you, as the customer, on paper, when you go to buy it, it looks like you're buying this one thing that will be all seamlessly integrated. And then you find out, well, like the the Windows version you have to manage with this interface, and the Mac and
Mm-hmm.
Linux version you have this other interface, and if you want to use your firewall, you got this other management interface. And there's this, I think as a customer, you have this belief that I'm buying, company X's, maybe X isn't a great one to use right now, company Y's, security suite, and therefore it's all, seamlessly integrated. I think it's just not reality. And I think,
Mm-mm.
by the way, furthermore, it creates some big problems. And the one I will simply call it the Broadcom problem.
Hmm.
So think about what happens if Broadcom comes along and buys the company who's providing all of your security tools.
Or maybe like VMware as an example, but sure.
Or VMware. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Point is that now you have to not like replace one component in your tool set. Like you have to probably replace the whole tool set, or you're going to be in this unaffordable mess. All that said, I think that the net point is sound, that you really have to find a way to integrate those, and by the way, what that means is going to be very dependent on the organization. And in some
Yeah.
instances, it's going to mean that like you're selecting security technology, not only based on like its effectiveness, but also like its ability to be integrated through APIs and whatnot, so that it can feed, it can be managed by the automation system that you've pieced together. So I it's a interesting thing. Now there's, I guess, one other. I know I said there was only one more, but I guess my last thought on this is that I think this whole report seems to be implying that it is tool consolidation, or this platformization, that is driving these efficiencies. And they have lots of fancy charts, and they segment the respondents into quartiles and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. And the implication is very clearly that the the ones who are doing the best are the ones that are platformized, platformatized, however you say that,
Who've adopted their vision.
who adopted their vision. And I
Yeah.
think it's the wrong way around. I think the the right way to think about it, I suspect, at least my intuition, is that it's the companies and the organizations and the infosec teams who are the most mature already, who are the ones that have adopted this. And my gut tells me that the mere fact of adopting this strategy isn't going to, reduce the amount of time for you to detect a breach or to respond and mitigate a breach. Like, those are attributes of the maturity of your program. And I think your adoption of consistent technology is an artifact of that maturity, not the other way around.
It's a good point. I've been chomping at the bit to talk about this story. I'm pretty much
Good.
going to kill any chance Palo Alto and IBM is going to sponsor our show. So just for the record.
Okay.
So for background, I also worked for a number of vendors in sales engineering roles. And I've also been in the industry long enough that we've seen this consolidation cycle happen a couple of times. Computer associates, network associates, who else? We saw a bunch of other roles. I should have done research, and we've seen this
McAfee,
play. McAfee,
Symantec. Yep.
Symantec, very true. Here's how I think this plays out. And I'm just going to say real quick, I call BS on this report entirely, because this is a very market sales driven report that's targeted at selling to the executives in their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very clear reason why they're going down this path. So let's say I'm going to pick on Palo Alto, but I worked for Checkpoint. I saw the same thing at Checkpoint, and I'm probably going to piss off some Checkpoint people when I say this. When you get your core market that you're good at, So let's say it's Palo Alto or Check Point and it's firewalls. And you lock that down. You eventually get to a point where you've got as much of that market as you can. You've got the total addressable market, and now you are bumping along at like steady state. Steady state is not acceptable to these companies. They have to grow. They have to increase sales. So the way that these teams look at this is you now have a customer. Okay, you can either be a farmer or you can be a hunter. Hunter means you go find new customers. Farmer is you find more sales in your existing customers. And the way you do that is offer new functionality that comes with a new price point, and you spread laterally throughout the organization. Wiz, who I like, but Wiz is doing this right now, and I'll pick on Wiz a little bit too. They were very, very good at their core, which was analyzing cloud environments for vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and that sort of things. And they've done gangbusters in that market, but now they're getting into Wiz code analysis. They're getting into Wiz defense. They're getting into all these other areas where they're now taking all this success that they've spent and they've made all this money on, and now investing into other areas that they can sell into to get more money from their existing customer base. But this means they're also competing with other vendors who their own core competency is very mature. All right, so let's pick on Wiz again for a minute. And I'm not like picking on one. Everybody's doing this, but this is why I think it's BS. Let's say Wiz introduces a static code analysis tool as an example, and they're now competing with existing very mature static code analysis companies. Okay, but they go to your executive, they go to your CISO and say, "Look, we do static code analysis too. Why do you have a different vendor for that?" Oh, we can sell it for 75% of that cost.
Right.
And now it's in one platform. But in general, those version 1, version 2, version 3 are not nearly as mature and flexible and capable as that best of breed vendor. This is my personal opinion, and I've seen it happen over and over again. It takes time for these vendors, whether they go buy or build, to fully integrate and fully realize that. But it looks perfect on a marketing slide. And it looks perfect in their RFIs when they respond, yes, we do that too. And when they're selling to executives, that is the sales tactic they use. And so this report reinforces that sales strategy of you're dumb to not go with a full platform because look how good we are. But when you sell to technical people after actually running it at the low level, actually have to make this stuff work, it's not nearly as good as they make it sound. And I'm biting my tongue a little bit here because I get frustrated with this topic because I've seen this over and over again. And salespeople come in and they try to cross-sell and they try to sow doubt of why are you spending so much money on this other vendor? Because this other vendor is best of breed and I've got it well integrated. Here's the other aspect. The more I use of one particular vendor, the harder it is for me to rip them out and replace them. They want this to be sticky. So the more features I use, the bigger headache it is for me to replace it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I want to be nimble. I want to be able to rip out a vendor I don't like, who pisses me off, or suddenly raises the rates by 20%. So frankly, I think as a non-CISO, but high-level security executive, I want best of breed that directly meets exactly what I need to do the way I needed to do it. Because here's the other problem. My platform vendor has their own view of how they solve the problem. That may not be the way I want to solve the problem. That's why I like competition. Like this vendor has a different view of static code analysis and how they present that information and how they work with it. That may not be the way my platform does it. And now how much inefficiency have I introduced because I'm stuck going down this path that only this one vendor wants me to go down because it may integrate.
Right.
It frustrates me so much. And this is all about, I know you're smiling at me, you're chuckling at me. This is all about these vendors trying to get more addressable market, grow at any cost. And typically, their first couple of versions suck ass. But it's good enough to get them in the door and get them sales opportunities and then continue to iterate and make it better. So if you're got nothing, you're brand new, you've got no stack, maybe it makes sense. But typically, this is a sales technique going at the CEO, CISO, CFO level of efficiency, vendor management, lower cost. It's not, I don't believe the efficacy. I don't. Straight up. Bullshit. I have strong feelings on this topic. I'm sorry.
I would not have guessed that.
This will be a short on YouTube, I'm sure.
I,
And I've burned all of our time for the rest of the show.
It's all good. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think that I guess one thing I will disagree with is I think that sales strategy works better with the CEO and the CFO than it necessarily does with a lot of CIO and CISOs.
Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that statement. They're more technical typically.
Which, that by the way is IBM's bread and butter. They go after higher level, right? They're not after the technical executives. They're after the business executives. Their business is selling enterprise license agreements, and you don't end up with anything that's fantastic, but you end up with this super expansive suite of kind of mediocre stuff.
Right. Now, that's not to say that some companies don't do this well, right? I've seen some companies who very carefully and thoughtfully expand beyond their core competency, and they do a good job, right? But the Palos and the IBMs of the world, they're growing through acquisition, and I think I can say this now. I think all my NDAs are expired. Checkpoint was doing a bunch of this when I was there too, and they sucked at it. They would try to bolt on something they bought, and it was terrible. And it took them a long time to get better at it, right? But the sales team's out there selling it and being told to sell it, and
and it's the customers that suffer in those instances because you're buying something with an expectation.
My advice is test it well.
Mm-hmm.
Don't buy anything without extensive POC. I mean, the other thing is I'm buying into the ecosystem. I'm buying into the future with this company. They're going to partner with me. Okay, unless you're a Fortune 100, that's BS. They don't care what your opinion is. You're not going to drive their roadmap. Sorry. Not in the near term. Not in the time frame that's going to be meaningful for your problem most of the time. Not for these big players. You might get a niche player who absolutely will work with you, but not these big players. Big players don't care.
Which, honestly, that's probably who this report is aimed at, is the Fortune 100.
Yep, absolutely. Anyway, I'm sure I'll get some hate mail on this one.
By the way, I am in the process of reading a book right now. It's called The CISO Evolution. And it is really about the business aspect of being a CISO. And when I read this report, it took me back to a lot of what this particular book is talking about. So if you're not familiar with the book and you're interested in being a CISO, to all those of you out there, I would definitely recommend it. I'm only about halfway through it, and it's I would say it's as much MBA as it is CISO. It's a very interesting book.
What's the book again? CISO Evolution?
Yeah.
Business Knowledge for Cybersecurity?
Yes.
And it is by, I'm looking it up, for Cybersecurity Executives, first edition, by Matthew Sharp, and another name that I will butcher pronouncing, so I'm not going to do it justice. So it's CISO Evolution, Business Knowledge for Cybersecurity Executives.
It's a good book, and it really helps. I had a speaking engagement a couple of weeks ago up in Raleigh at a ISACA event, and one of the questions I got was the age-old question about how do I convince my management team to invest more in security? And this book actually helps you answer that question in meaningful ways, because and by the way, in some instances, it helps you understand why it might not make sense. So I think it's good.
Take some notes. Yeah. When you finish it, we'll do a segment on it.
Absolutely. It's a good book. All right. So sorry for that digression. But,
no, it's all good.
All right. Moving on to our next story. This one comes from 9to5Mac, and the title here is Security Bite. Top macOS threat found riding the DeepSeek wave. Holy cow. So unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably well aware that DeepSeek is a thing now, and I think it caused, if I'm not mistaken, it caused the single largest drop in stock value in the history of the stock market, at least for one company. It was like hundreds of billions of dollars from Nvidia's uh, stock value, which was interesting.
Yeah.
So DeepSeek, the headline there was DeepSeek is this new AI model from a startup in China who trained a model, an LLM model that is arguably more effective and better at its core jobs than OpenAI's ChatGPT is, and it
And
costs
supposedly, yeah,
like 3% allegedly, three
right.
percent of what ChatGPT costs to train. Now, there's a lot of stuff that has come out since then, like the fact that it appears that though they only spent 3%, some of the money was fronted by unsurprisingly by the Chinese government, and it also looks like they were in some way using information or some aspects of OpenAI's model itself. A little unclear how that works, but there it is. That's not the point of the story here. The point of the story here is that we had this brand new thing, this brand new shiny toy come out, and everybody is rushing out to want to play with it because it looks like it's amazing. All of the reporting is that it's so much better, so much more effective, so much more efficient than anything we have in the US and other parts of the world. And so we have lots of people wanting to go kick the tires, and this is the kind of thing that causes the bad guys to like lick their chops. Like they live for this sort of thing, and sure enough, some some uh some bad guys here have created a set of Mac packages that purport to be the DeepSeek LLM that you can run locally on your computer. However, it, as you might expect, is not actually that. What I found most interesting about this, I mean, other than highlighting, we often talk, especially in the context of phishing attacks, we talk about there being a common element around urgency. And when you get a phishing email or some sort of social engineering attack, it usually has some kind of artificial urgency attached to it. Your account's going to get canceled, you're going to lose your email, your boss is angry, you're trying to close a deal, whatever. There's always some aspect of urgency, and I think that there's also a similar concept around novelty.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
I think this particular instance is exploiting that novelty aspect. So in addition to that, the other thing that I found most interesting is that Apple actually did a really good job of preventing attacks from stuff like this. They have there was an X Protect, or I forget the
Gatekeeper. Yeah.
Gatekeeper. Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
That prevents unknown applications like this. But what the adversary here has done is packaged up a file with some instructions for you to run this. Not only download the DMG, which contains the malicious version that can't be installed because of Gatekeeper, but it also includes a what looks to be an installer that you have to manually drag onto your terminal so that it launches a bunch of malicious bash scripts
Getting around Gatekeeper. Yeah.
to get around Gatekeeper. And we've seen this before. There's another on the Windows side. There's another one where the attack basically forces it forces some PowerShell stuff into your clipboard, and then the trick is that it incents you to open up a PowerShell terminal and paste the contents of your clipboard, and then it's off to the races. So kind of similar thing. But what is interesting to me is that as I think about like the totality of all of the security awareness training I've ever taken in my life, and that's been a lot from a user standpoint, that has never come up. And this
It's something not to do.
is something not to do, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that this is something that now we've seen it twice in the span of a couple of months. I think this is something that we've really got to raise awareness around.
Yeah. So for the record too, the malware like will grab all your commands, grab all your keychain, passwords, your credit card info, your files, crypto wallets, whatever. It's an information stealer is what it is. And it sends it all back. And in general, like I think you're onto something very interesting with the novelty. And I wonder if there's also maybe it's the same urge about the fear of missing out on the new hotness and the new like AI is this weird land grab of knowledge share right now. And it feels like we've talked about this a ton. I won't belabor this point, but everybody and their brother feels like in the information security industry or the software industry, if they don't adopt AI, they're going to go out of business. And it's so disruptive. Like it's the definition of disruptive. And who knows? I will say I am personally very gun shy of DeepSeek because it's China based, and we've got another story that talks about some interesting aspects of this. I'm going to say this as politically correct as I can. We have seen plenty of evidence that China is not shy about stealing as much information as they want. And they have a tight control over all the businesses in their country from a government level. Like I think it's every company has to be partially owned by the government, basically, and they can influence that. And China's not so much our friend in that sphere right now. So I'm very cautious about DeepSeek, personally.
I think most countries engage in some sort of cyber espionage and whatnot, but I really feel like China has taken intellectual property theft and turned it into a industrialized endeavor.
Don't quote me on this, but it's my understanding that sort of the culturally, they didn't really have much the same concept of intellectual property as the West does. It just wasn't part of their culture and their ethos. And it's not a moral thing. It just wasn't like, how can you own ideas, right? And they, in fact, as I recall, and again, this is not my area of expertise, I may be butchering this, but like when they started getting into things like World Trade Organizations, they were very confused by all this intellectual property and copyright theft. And like, well, why is this a thing? As I recall. So it's just a different view of that concept, I think, culturally at times. But yeah, no, if I have staff going to China, I just assume that their systems are going to be compromised and data will be stolen and that kind of thing. Maybe that's bad, but that's how I look at it.
All right, our next story comes from Security Week, and the title here is SonicWall confirms exploitation of new SMA 0-day. So this is yet another. I guess it's not really a firewall per se. It's the appliance management console and the central management console. I guess appliances or applications that are at issue here. There's a CVE, it's CVE 2025-23006. That's that affects version 12.4.3 dash 028854. It's great numberings there, guys. And this, it's a little unclear to me exactly what this CVE is impacting in the application, but it was Microsoft notified SonicWall about this particular vulnerability, and it has subsequently been added to the CISA known exploited vulnerability list as something that is actively being exploited in the wild. There is now a patch out there, but for some period of time, it was being exploited while it was unpatched. And what irritates the ever-loving crap out of me is that this is yet another case where we have the core problem here is that these should not have been exposed to the internet, right? They were exposed, and sure, there was a vulnerability in them. And as we talked about in some previous stories, like just assuming that something is internal to your network isn't a safe bet that you shouldn't patch, but it is really flying without a net of any sort, in my estimation, to have management consoles connected to the internet. And I think we're at a point in history where we collectively need to have, as a feature of our security programs, a comprehension that we should be not only deploying things in a way that doesn't have the management consoles on the internet, but we should be actively looking for them and basically seeking and destroying, and have a way to handle those. Have a separate network, or some standard methodology to handle that, so that people don't have to kind of innovate on their own. That you actually have a standardized way of connecting and managing these things that doesn't involve the freaking internet. Sorry.
Yeah, agreed. No, I'm with you. It's again, this continues this flood of these types of devices just having exploit after exploit after exploit. This is such a weird cluster right now, and I mean cluster in the actual sense of like it's a cluster of problems, not as in a Charlie Foxtrot. Of all of these sort of like remote access or VPN concentrators or firewalls or edge devices and related stuff having these vulnerabilities. So yeah, I mean, agreed. It just shouldn't be on the internet. But as you said, also patch it if it's internal, because like we said earlier, bad guys will go lateral. I don't know what else to say. It's like patch your stuff, guys, as soon as you can, and don't.
I think what bothers me about these is, as we've talked about in the past, we're at a point in history, and I certainly have my speculation on why this is happening, but we are finding almost every week another firewall, another component of a firewall, not necessarily the same vendors all the time, but some aspect of commercial enterprise firewalls are being exploited as 0 days before patches come out. And in most instances, not all instances, in most instances, those are impacting components that have no business being exposed to the internet in the first place. And so companies are getting compromised because people are deploying these things in irresponsible ways. And I don't know if I don't know what necessarily is the underlying cause of that. If I know that there was one particular vendor that I used to deal with in my former job, that the lower tiered firewall appliances defaulted to having their management interfaces on the internet. And it wasn't until you got into their upper tiers that it actually, by default, provisioned them so that they were on an internal protected network. So
that hurts my soul.
I suspect that there is some culpability, or some culpability might not be the right word, right? But there's some aspect of the feature set of the devices themselves that are perhaps contributing to this, or the documentation, or the consulting services that go into them. I don't really know, but God damn it, we got to get these things off the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, if it makes you feel any better, at least in this case, one researcher said Shodan only found 215.
Yes.
Roughly 2,000 exposed SMA appliances. 215 appeared to expose it that were impacted by this. That's a pretty small amount, but your point still stands. And
yeah, that was, by the way, I don't know how. I'm not sure how many of those had to get taken down because they were already compromised. Like, is that 215 at the peak or after? Widespread exploitation.
You're unemployed right now. You could make it your mission to walk the earth and find every single IPv4 address and make sure it's not an exposed management server. And
I could.
And you could get in adventures. You could walk from town to town like the old Incredible Hulk. We'd have sad Hulk music as you walk away, and you show up and you help the town get their management servers off the public internet, save the town from the banditos, and then move on. I think that may be your new mission.
I don't know what to say.
I get some comfy walking shoes, I think, is what you should do. And just start walking the earth and preaching. Turn off those management servers. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this management interface.
I think I need to find some way of doing this. I mentor a team who does something similar with open S3 buckets, and they're equally frustrated with people leaving open S3 buckets. So it
could be like the A-Team. It could be it could be a team up of, if you're in trouble and you can find them, the cyber A-Team will show up and solve your problem.
And we would fly around on Airwolf, right?
You leave Airwolf out of this. She is a queen.
Was.
She will always live in my heart.
All right.
If there's any show that's due a reboot, but if they do it wrong, by God, I will riot.
I don't know why there hasn't been one. It seems like we're way past it. Anyway, boy, we went far afield on that one. So the last story for today comes from theregister.com. It's been a long time since we've had a Register article. And the title here is Guess Who Left a Database Wide Open, Exposing Chat Logs, API Keys, and More. Yep, DeepSeek.
Dun, dun, dun.
So this was a issue found by Wiz. Wiz's research team is super adept at finding exposed or improperly secured databases. And in this instance, they found through some subdomain DNS reconnaissance a ClickHouse database that was wide open to the internet with zero authentication challenges that provided access to apparently millions of records or millions of lines of chat logs. So people interacting with the DeepSeek LLM, kind of like you would do with ChatGPT.
So not only do you have to worry about like them using it to retrain their models or whatever else, they could just leave it exposed to the internet for anyone to find.
Yes.
Hey, more training history for other vendors.
Right. Which I think is another one of those lessons around the novelty, right? We had lots. I know personally, lots of people signed up, and in fact, they had to turn off signups for some period of time because they were under attack. And by the way, I'm still not sure if it was an actual attack or just too many people trying to sign up all at the same time. Because for some period of time, it was the number one application on the iOS and the Android app stores, which is amazing.
Mind-boggling. That is
Mind
non-trivial.
mind-boggling. And look, this is you said it before, right? This is a Chinese application, and I'm not trying to bash on the Chinese, right? But like there's a discontinuity in how laws are and data privacy expectations and whatnot. And we saw lots of people running off and interacting with this and finding out that it had some funny, at least funny to us, censorship things like certain historical events being censored in that model. But the other interesting thing I thought was it's open source. Like one of the really novel things about this is that it's an open source model. You can actually download the model, and in fact, almost every single one to a T of the of not Chat GPT, of course, right? But like Perplexity and Amazon and Azure and Google and most all of the AI providers actually downloaded that model and offered it to you in their own implementation, which would not have been impacted by this. And so I think the
In
lesson,
seconds, by the way. In
yeah,
seconds.
I know.
There was like a mad rush that is just like, does anyone stop in to consider anything? Or are we just like, get it out there now, we're doomed?
Someone from my old job asked me, is this like how much risk does this impart? And it's hard to know, right? Because it's not like downloading a binary application and loading it, right? But at the same time, we for years, and I have the same complaint about Docker containers. So if you've heard this before, you'll recognize it, right? For years, we have made, like decades, in fact, we've made fun of and poked jokes at and included training about not picking up USB drives in the parking lot of your office and then running and plugging those into your work computer because that seems like a really bad idea. But here we are, like, for many of us, it's kind of is a adversary, right? For better or for worse. Um, you know, a political adversary or economic adversary at least. Um, and downloading something from them that you don't fully understand and then loading that up into systems on your network to do stuff. So what I'm advocating for is a little bit of thought and diligence and whatnot. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all these people
Ain't
really
nobody
thought it
got
all
time for
through.
that.
Maybe they
Ain't
thought
nobody
it
got
all
time for
through.
that.
They pulled out their threat model checklist and they war gamed it out and determined that it was perfectly safe to do. And so then they went and did it. But I have a bad feeling that's not what happened here. And in the instance of people who actually used the hosted version of DeepSeek, your data may have been exposed. If you
Okay, boomer. This is not 10x thinking.
it's definitely not 10x. No, I'd never claimed to be a 10x thinker, by the way. Only
This
11x.
is not. This is not the innovate. This is not the innovative mindset we need. But
No.
back to the story. It gets worse. It wasn't just that they found like raw data of chat history, backend data, sensitive information, log streams, API secrets. The SQL databases were available to them, and they could send and execute any arbitrary SQL query from their browsers. Show
Right.
tables, run tables, like everything. Like they had operational control it was wide open, unauthenticated.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I mean, to DeepSeek's credit, when they were notified, they quickly fixed it. But I'm speculating here. I said the same thing about OpenAI, by the way. When companies are rushing to get this stuff out the door, security often is missed.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is a huge miss, but more subtle misses could certainly happen, and maturity is not there. So, speed can be the enemy of security. And we are seeing a whole lot of speed around AI right now.
Yeah.
And, but business is going to business. And I would caution you, dear listener, if you are the okay boomer Luddite that Jerry's being in the business, be careful how you say it. Otherwise, you will be shut out of the conversation. And I know that sounds very cynical, but it is true. Like, we don't want to lose our seat at the table by being too risk averse on this, for good or ill, movement that's occurring, in my unsolicited opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But look at frankly, this is bad for all the stuff to have been wide open. And who knows what else is out there for any of these vendors like this. And they're probably getting a lot of free audits right now.
Oh, count on it. Count on it. I know there's a lot of consternation. I think the European data privacy people have opened a GDPR investigation into them, but at the same time, like, I don't necessarily know that this company, this DeepSeek company, necessarily positioned themselves in this way. I think it was, I think somebody let the cat out of the bag and said, "Look, this model is way better." I mean, I'm paraphrasing and being a little hyperbolic, but this model is way better than OpenAI and is way cheaper, and that seemed to have caught the imagination and attention of a lot of media in the U.S. And my guess is it caught them flat-footed, because I don't think this DeepSeek company is all that old. I think they're only like 2 years old or something like that.
I should have done the research on this. I remember reading this yesterday, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it's not like DeepSeek promoted this. As I understand this went viral from an investor blog talking about how this was a threat to NVIDIA. And it got picked up and rebroadcast by a couple of very big investment accounts on various social media. And that blew it wide open to what's happening, what we're seeing here. But I don't know, right. like I think that's how we found out about it. And that's, too, you were talking about earlier, that was a massive loss on NVIDIA, because the theory was DeepSeek didn't need the number of chips and didn't need all this investment, all this NVIDIA hardware. And that was a threat to NVIDIA's massive valuations, which are stratospheric right now. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's not like DeepSeek was like, "Hey, come look at us." I think this kind of went viral through an odd set of circumstances.
Yeah.
But again, take that with a grain of salt. I don't have the research in front of me.
Yeah, it's interesting times. You hit on something I think is worth repeating. There are a lot of people in the security community who are very skeptical of AI, and for good reason, right? But at the same time, organizations are moving, but both on the provider and the consumer side, moving to AI at a speed like I've not seen anything. I think that a lot of us, I said it before, and I'll say it again, a lot of us are looking at AI through the lens of our experience with blockchain. We thought that this was a pointless technology that consumed a whole lot of energy for dubious value. And, it's just not that, it's not that situation here. Are there instances where people are sticking AI in pointless stuff? Absolutely. Are there things that are being AI enabled today that will not be AI enabled in 2 or 3 or 4 years? Most definitely. But it does not take away from the fact that there are companies already making productive use of AI, and companies will continue to take things like this that appear to be novel and perhaps provide the ability to move the needle or make material improvements above what they're already doing, and they're going to go rush off and play with it. And what I am trying to advocate is we still have to be a little bit skeptical, but not to the point where we're necessarily blocking what the business is trying to accomplish with its strategic objectives, because your replacement will be the one that ends up helping to figure out how to use DeepSeek. I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but it's not necessarily wrong. If you are obstructionist about the business trying to meet its objectives in the most efficient way possible, like you're gonna get left behind.
Yep. And I know some people will yell at their podcast playing device when they hear that. Uh, I think it's a hard lesson for us in security. At the end of the day, we're still here to enable business.
Right.
And if business wants to go down this path, we either go with them and try to help as much as we can, or they go around us. We cannot stop them effectively more than once or twice before we will be replaced. And I know that sounds very defeatist or very not very morally strong, but I think it's true.
Right.
And we may very well be in a situation where we can say, I told you so, and I informed you thusly, but I hope not.
So I think there's two ways to look at this story. Number, the first is from the perspective of DeepSeek. They obviously made a mistake by leaving this ClickHouse database exposed. I don't feel like, based on what I know of ClickHouse and the way it's presented in this article, and I also read the Wiz report about it, I don't think it was necessarily part of the operation. Like, it's not in the flow of how their DeepSeek model works. I think it's an adjunct and things that they're using to analyze what people are asking of it, and it does have other sorts of sensitive information. But I say that because I am left with this distinct feeling that this was set up as not part of the core infrastructure of DeepSeek, but as an adjunct. It was something that they were, some data science person set up or what have you to to gather intelligence, to mine information out of what was happening with the with their main application. So that, by the way, is not unique. Like, we've seen that happen many times in the past, and I think it's something that we have to be cognizant of, and again, not necessarily stand in the way of, but help facilitate in a way that doesn't have it sitting out on the internet with no authentication. And then on the very other side, I think we have to be, again, looking through the lens of what we just said, I think we have to be the advocate to say, well, maybe we shouldn't play with the one that's hosted by the company in China. Maybe we should try to find one who is, who it's either hosted by us in a sandbox or in a partner that we trust, like, AWS or Azure or what have you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the problem is AI is getting built into everything that you can't control. Like, every bit of code, every SaaS tool you have, every whatever next version is going to have some bit of AI, and who knows where that's being run out of. So it's not all very discrete that you can control.
It's true. I guess I'm talking more of the tire kicking. Like
yeah, agreed. I mean, the DeepSeek terms of conditions are very, very clear that they're going to gather and keep everything and use everything you type into it. So
it's not that uncommon for that sort of thing. So anyway,
yeah, I hear you. And on that positive note,
and I have no cats. So damn it.
Oh, yeah, I don't have any. My in my office right now.
They're off somewhere else. Anyway, thank you everybody for your time. I hope this was useful to you. You can find links to all the stories we talked about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 295 and you'll find it. You can find all of our back episodes and links for those back episodes as well. You can follow me on social media. It's at Jerry at infosec.exchange, which is my most excellent Mastodon server. And where can they find you?
I'm also on your most excellent Mastodon server, infosec.exchange, at Lurg, L-E-R-G. I'm also still on X, at Lurg there as well, and LinkedIn. And I think that's pretty much it. Or you can email us, info at defensivesecurity.org.
Correct. All
and
right.
Once again,
yes,
I will just say thank you to our Patreon donors. You guys are awesome.
Thank you very much. We will talk again real soon. Have a great week, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.